The winter of 1876 descended upon Arizona territory like a wolf, silent, merciless, and hungry. Snow blanketed the White Mountains in depths unseen for decades, choking the passes and isolating the scattered homesteads that clung to the valleys below. In Crowley's Basin, the Hale timber mill stood silent, its great saw frozen in place, the water wheel locked in ice. Margaret Maggie Hale stood at the edge of the property, her breath forming clouds in the bitter air, as she surveyed what remained of her father's dream. At 23, she possessed a quiet determination that had only hardened since her return from London 2 years prior. The finishing school her father had scraped together funds for had polished her speech and posture, but underneath the proper exterior beat the heart of a frontier woman who had buried her mother at 12 and learned to manage ledgers by 14. "Miss Hale," Sheriff Donnelly's voice carried across the yard. His approach was heralded by the crunch of snow beneath his boots. "Got something you ought to see." Maggie turned, squinting against the morning glare. "Sheriff," she greeted, tugging her father's old coat tighter around her slender frame. "What brings you all the way out here in this weather?" Donnelly removed his hat, revealing a receding hairline frosted with white. His weathered face carried the solemn expression she'd grown to dread. "Notice from the territorial court," he said, extending a folded document. "Mr. Holloway's petition has been granted preliminary approval. If your father doesn't meet his payment obligations by the month's end, the bank will foreclose." Maggie's gloved fingers closed around the paper, but she didn't need to read it. 28 days, she murmured. In the dead of winter. "Holloway knows exactly what he's doing," Donnelly said, his voice low. "Railroads paying top dollar for properties along the proposed route. Your father's land is all we have left," Maggie finished, her jaw tightening. "Is my father—" The sheriff shook his head. "Still at Doc Wilson's. That cough ain't improving, Miss Hale. I stopped by on my way here." Inside the modest cabin, Maggie fed the wood stove and settled at the rough-hewn table where her father had taught her arithmetic as a child. The financial ledgers told a story more brutal than the winter outside. 3 missed bank payments, dwindling supplies, and 6 months of wages owed to the handful of men who had stayed loyal to the Hale family. The solution lay in the stacks of cut timber behind the mill, enough to satisfy their debt 3 times over. But with the main pass snowed in, they couldn't deliver to the buyers in Phoenix. "There has to be another way through," she whispered to the empty room. A sharp knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Samuel Weaver, her father's foreman for 15 years, stood on the porch, snow crusting his beard. "Miss Maggie, the boys and I been talking," he said, declining her offer to come inside. "There might be a way to get the timber through." Hope flickered briefly. "The Eastern Pass." Samuel shook his head. "Too narrow for the wagons. But there's an old hunting trail through Apache territory, cut straight through to the Henderson Valley. From there it's a clear shot to Phoenix." The hope dimmed. "Apache territory," she repeated. "The same Apaches who ambushed the Carson party last spring? That wasn't what happened, Miss Maggie, and you know it. Those fools went looking for trouble." Samuel's eyes held hers steadily. "The mountain belongs to one band now. Their leader, they call him Kai. He's kept the peace these past 2 years, even helped that lost Prescott boy last summer. And you think this Kai would let us pass?" Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "Man controls that mountain like it's his kingdom. Settlers avoid him. Apaches from other bands respect him. They say he was educated at some Indian school back east before returning to his people." Maggie's mind raced. "Where would I find him?" Samuel's eyes widened. "You can't be serious, Miss Maggie. No white woman has ever—" "Where?" Later that afternoon, Maggie stood before the small mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the heavy woolen scarf around her neck. Her reflection showed a woman transformed from the girl who had once dreamed of London society. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical braid, her blue eyes harder than they should be at her age. London seemed a lifetime ago. The music, the dances, the young baron who had promised marriage only to disappear when he learned of her father's financial troubles. She tucked her mother's small derringer into her pocket. It wouldn't stop an Apache warrior, but its weight provided comfort. The journey took her higher into the mountains than she had ever ventured. 3 hours of riding through snow-laden pines, following Samuel's crude map, until she reached the stone formation he had described, a natural arch that locals called the Devil's Doorway. She waited as instructed. The silence of the mountain pressed against her ears until even her horse's breathing seemed intrusive. "You are either very brave or very foolish." The voice came from behind her, though she had heard no approach. Turning slowly, Maggie found herself facing a man who seemed part of the mountain itself. He stood a head taller than most men she knew, with shoulders broadened by years of survival rather than leisure. His black hair fell past his shoulders, partially bound with a strip of leather. His face bore the high cheekbones and proud nose of his people, but his eyes, dark and penetrating, were what held her attention. They assessed her with an intelligence that belied the savage tales told in town. "I am neither brave nor foolish," Maggie replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I am desperate." A flicker of something, surprise perhaps, crossed his face. He wore buckskin leggings and a wool shirt that might once have belonged to a cavalry officer, adapted with beadwork across the chest. A rifle rested casually against his shoulder. "I am Maggie Hale," she continued when he remained silent. "My father owns the timber mill in Crowley's Basin. I know who you are." His English was flawless, with barely a trace of accent. "The question is, why you are here, Maggie Hale?" She straightened her spine, the way her London instructors had taught her. "I need safe passage through your mountains, for 6 wagons of timber to Phoenix." His expression remained impassive. "The northern pass will be clear in spring. By spring, we will have nothing left to save." Kai studied her for a long moment, then gestured toward a narrow trail she hadn't noticed. "Come, we don't talk business in the open when snow threatens." The shelter was a small cave, its entrance nearly invisible until they were upon it. Inside, a small fire cast dancing shadows on the rock walls. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, feeding the flames before turning to face her again. "Tell me your story, Maggie Hale." All of it. And she did, surprising herself with her candor. About her father's illness, the debt, Holloway's schemes to acquire their land for the railroad. About the timber that could save them, if only they could deliver it. When she finished, Kai remained silent for so long that Maggie wondered if he had even been listening. "What you ask is difficult," he finally said. "The trail is treacherous in winter. It would take 5 days if the weather holds." "I can pay—" A sharp gesture cut her off. "I have no use for your money." "Then what do you want?" The question escaped before she could consider its implications. Kai moved to the cave's entrance, staring out at the gathering clouds. "There is a valley, west of Henderson Creek, sacred to my people for generations. The railroad men have been surveying it. Your friend Holloway leads them." Understanding dawned. "You want me to stop the railroad?" "I want you to speak for us." He turned back to her, his face half in shadow. "When you return to your world, I want you to tell them that the Apache who rules these mountains has granted you safe passage in exchange for the protection of our sacred lands. Make them see that we are not savages to be feared or animals to be hunted, but people with rights to our ancestral home. They won't listen to me, I'm just a woman. You are a white woman from a respected family. Your father was a friend to the territorial governor before his illness. Your voice carries weight you don't recognize." Maggie considered his words. "And if I agree, you'll guide us through the pass." "I will. How do I know I can trust you?" Something like amusement flickered in his eyes. "You don't. Just as I don't know if I can trust you to honor our agreement once you're safely back among your people." Outside, the wind had picked up, driving the snow in horizontal sheets. Kai studied the weather with practiced eyes. "The storm is worsening. You cannot return tonight." Alarm flashed through her. "I can't stay here." "You can and will unless you prefer freezing to death." His tone brooked no argument. "Your horse is already sheltered with mine. We will speak more in the morning." He offered her a blanket of surprising softness. "Rest, Maggie Hale. Tomorrow we will formalize our deal, if you still wish to make it." As Maggie wrapped herself in the blanket, she realized she was alone in a cave with the most feared man in the territory, the Apache who ruled the mountains. Yet strangely, she felt safer than she had in months. 3 days later, Maggie stood beside the lead wagon as the small caravan prepared to depart at dawn. Frost sparkled on the pine needles, and the eastern sky glowed amber through the trees. Samuel and the 5 other men checked harnesses and secured the loads of lumber one final time. their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "You're sure about this, Miss Maggie?" Samuel asked quietly, glancing toward the tree line where Kai waited, motionless as the pines themselves. "Trusting our lives to an Apache, he's our only chance," Maggie replied, adjusting her gloves, "and I gave my word." Samuel nodded reluctantly. "Your pa would be proud of what you're doing." Scared half to death, but proud all the same. The mention of her father tightened Maggie's throat. She had visited him at the doctor's house before leaving, his thin face pale against the pillows. "Just get back safe," he had whispered between coughing fits. "The mill, the land, none of it matters if something happens to you." But it did matter. The land was his legacy, the culmination of 20 years of struggle since he'd brought Maggie and her mother to the territory. She would not let Holloway take it now. Kai approached, a silent shadow materializing from the trees. He wore the same buckskins, but had added a heavy wool coat that had seen better days. His rifle was slung across his back, a knife at his belt. "The weather will hold for today," he announced without preamble. "We move now." The trail began easily enough, a narrow but navigable path winding through the pines. The horses strained against the weight of the timber wagons, their flanks steaming in the cold. Kai scouted ahead while Maggie drove the lead wagon, her hands numb despite the thick gloves. By midday, the path steepened, cutting along a ridge that dropped sharply to a frozen creek bed below. The wagons crawled forward one at a time, wheels dangerously close to the edge. "Steady!" Maggie called to the nervous horses as her wagon rounded a particularly tight bend. The right wheel slipped on ice, sending a shower of pebbles down the ravine. For a heart-stopping moment the wagon tilted. Then Kai was there, his shoulder against the wagon bed, muscles straining as he pushed it back from the brink. Their eyes met briefly as the danger passed. No words, just a shared acknowledgement of how quickly life could end on the mountain. They made camp that night in a protected hollow. The men huddled around the fire, casting wary glances at Kai, who sat apart, carving something from a piece of pine with swift, sure strokes of his knife. Maggie approached him, offering a tin cup of coffee. "Thank you. For earlier." He accepted the cup with a slight nod. "The mountain is unforgiving of mistakes. Is that why they say you rule it? Because you understand its moods?" A faint smile touched his lips. "I don't rule the mountain. I respect it. There's a difference." "How did you come to speak English so well?" The question had burned in her mind since their first meeting. His expression closed slightly. "Government school in Pennsylvania. 10 years of kill the Indian, save the man." The bitterness in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. "And yet you returned. This is my home." He gestured to the mountains around them. "They took our language, cut our hair, dressed us like white men, but they couldn't take the mountain from our hearts." The firelight cast his profile in bronze, highlighting a thin scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. Maggie found herself wondering how he had received it, in battle, or perhaps at this school he spoke of with such controlled anger. "What about you?" His question surprised her. "Samuel said you went east as well, to England." "London," she clarified. "My father saved for years to send me to finishing school. He thought I needed to become a proper lady." "Did you?" The unexpected question made her laugh softly. "I learned to pour tea correctly and make conversation about the weather. Not particularly useful skills in Arizona territory. And yet you came back." "This is my home," she echoed his words, realizing their truth as she spoke them. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of shared experience despite their vastly different worlds. The second day brought them higher into the mountains, where the snow lay deep and untouched. Kai broke trail, his snowshoes leaving a path for the horses to follow. By afternoon, clouds gathered again, heavy with the promise of more snow. "We need shelter before nightfall," Kai announced, pointing to a distant ridge. "There's a hunting cabin used by my people in summer. We can reach it before dark if we hurry." They pushed on as the first flakes began to fall. The cabin appeared just as dusk was settling, a simple log structure nestled against the mountainside. It was small for their party of 8, but the thick walls blocked the rising wind. Inside they found a stone hearth and stacked firewood, a blessing Maggie hadn't dared hope for. While the men tended the horses in a lean-to at the side of the cabin, she and Kai worked to start a fire. "Your men fear me," Kai observed quietly as the kindling caught. Maggie couldn't deny it. "They fear what they don't understand." And you? His dark eyes reflected the growing flames. Do you fear me, Maggie Hale? She considered the question honestly. I feared the idea of you before we met. The Apache who rules the mountains. It's a frightening story told in town. She added another stick to the fire. But no, I don't fear you now. I don't think I would be here if I did. He seemed about to reply when the cabin door burst open. Samuel stumbled in, his face pale beneath his beard. Riders, he gasped, coming up the trail. Kai was on his feet instantly. How many? 5, maybe 6, armed. Holloway's men, Maggie whispered. But how did they know? Kai's expression hardened. Someone in your town talks too much. He grabbed his rifle. Get your men inside. Douse the fire. The room plunged into smoky darkness. Through the single small window, Maggie could see the approaching riders, dark shapes against the snow. Her heart hammered in her chest as she reached for the derringer in her pocket. That won't help, Kai said softly, noticing the movement. Stay down and stay quiet. He slipped outside before she could protest. The men huddled against the walls, their own rifles ready but faces uncertain in the dim light. Minutes stretched like hours. Then came the sound Maggie had been dreading. Gunshots, 3 in rapid succession, followed by shouts. A horse screamed in pain. More shots, scattered this time. We should help him, she whispered to Samuel. The old foreman shook his head. He told us to stay put. Man knows what he's doing. Another shot rang out, closer this time, followed by an eerie silence. Maggie held her breath, straining to hear any movement outside. The door creaked open. They raised their rifles as one. It's done, Kai said, stepping inside. Blood stained the snow on his coat. Whether his or someone else's, Maggie couldn't tell. The riders? Samuel asked. 3 dead. 2 fled back down the mountain. Kai's voice was flat, his eyes unreadable. They won't return tonight. Are you hurt? Maggie asked, moving toward him. It's not my blood. He brushed past her to stoke the rekindled fire. We leave at first light. The storm is building. Later, when the others had fallen into uneasy sleep, Maggie found Kai sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. His coat lay aside, revealing a tear in his shirt where a bullet had grazed his upper arm. The wound wasn't deep, but it needed attention. Without a word, she dampened a cloth from her water flask and knelt beside him. He tensed as she reached for his arm, but didn't pull away. You should have said something, she murmured, cleaning dried blood from the wound. I've had worse. That doesn't make this nothing. She worked in silence for a moment. Those men, they were from town. Hired guns, professional killers. His jaw tightened. Holloway doesn't want your timber to reach Phoenix. The implication chilled her. He's willing to kill for our land? Men have killed for less. Kai's eyes met hers. Your world isn't as civilized as you pretend it is. Maggie couldn't argue. Instead, she finished bandaging his arm with strips torn from her petticoat, a scandalous solution her London teachers would have fainted to witness. Why did you come back? He asked suddenly. From London. You could have stayed, married well, lived a different life. The question caught her off guard with its perception. How do you know I didn't have the chance? Something in his expression told her he saw more than she wanted to reveal. The way you hold yourself, like someone who once believed in promises that weren't kept. Maggie looked away, uncomfortable with his accuracy. There was a man, a baron's son. He courted me, proposed marriage, until he learned my father's finances had collapsed. The admission still stung even after 2 years. I returned because I was needed here, because this land, however harsh, doesn't pretend to be something it isn't. Unlike people, Kai said softly. Unlike people, she agreed. In the firelight, with blood on the snow outside and danger still stalking them, Maggie realized something had changed within her. The London girl who had dreamed of ballrooms and titles was fading, replaced by a woman who understood the value of honesty, even when it came wrapped in danger. Tomorrow will be harder, Kai warned, his voice low. The storm, the steepest part of the trail, and they may come back with more men. We'll face it together, Maggie said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. That's our deal, isn't it? His eyes held hers for a long moment. Yes, Maggie Hale, that's our deal. Neither of them mentioned that the deal had somehow become about more than just safe passage and protected land. Some bargains, once struck, change in ways neither party can predict. The storm struck with fury at midday on their third day of travel. What began as light snowfall transformed into a blinding whiteout within hours, forcing the caravan to halt in a stand of thick pines. The temperature plummeted as the wind howled through the mountain pass, driving ice crystals that stung like needles against exposed skin. "We can't continue in this," Samuel shouted over the wind, his beard already crusted with ice. "Horses are about done in." Kai surveyed their surroundings, his expression grim. "There's a cave system half a mile ahead. We can shelter there until the storm breaks." They proceeded in single file, each man leading his team through snow that reached the horses' chests in places. Maggie's hands had lost all feeling despite her gloves, and her face burned from the constant assault of wind and ice. Ahead, Kai forged a path like a man possessed, pausing only to ensure they followed. The cave entrance appeared as a dark gash in the white landscape, barely visible through the curtain of snow. One by one, the wagons were positioned under an overhanging ledge that offered some protection from the drifts. The horses were unhitched and led deeper into the cavern, where the temperature, while still bitterly cold, at least spared them from the cutting wind. Inside, the cave opened into a series of chambers. Ancient pictographs adorned some of the walls. Handprints, animal figures, symbols whose meanings had been lost to time. "My ancestors sheltered here for generations," Kai explained, as they established a small camp in the largest chamber. A sacred place. The men set about making a fire while Maggie took stock of their supplies. What had been planned as a 5-day journey might now take 7 or more, depending on how long the storm lasted. Food was becoming a concern. "I'll hunt when the storm breaks," Kai said, reading her thoughts. "There are deer in these valleys, even in winter." As night fell outside, the temperature inside the cave dropped further. The men huddled near the fire, sharing stories to distract themselves from the cold and their predicament. Even Samuel, who had been most wary of Kai, included him in the conversation, asking respectful questions about the mountain and its paths. Maggie, exhausted from the day's ordeal, retreated to a small alcove where she had spread her bedroll. Sleep eluded her, however. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the blood on the snow, heard the gunshots echoing across the mountainside. Holloway's men would be waiting for them somewhere ahead. Of that, she had no doubt. A shadow fell across her alcove. Kai stood at the entrance, holding a small bundle. "For the cold," he said, offering what turned out to be a blanket of rabbit skins, meticulously stitched together. It was butter soft to the touch, and surprisingly warm. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "I can't take this." "You can and will unless you prefer freezing to death," he echoed his words from their first meeting, a hint of humor in his voice. "It was made by my sister before she died. I have carried it for years." The mention of his sister surprised her. It was the first personal detail he had shared. "What was her name?" "Naya." His expression softened slightly. "She was much like you, stubborn, brave when she shouldn't be. What happened to her?" "Fever." His voice grew distant. "The reservation doctor was too drunk to help. By the time I carried her to the mission, it was too late." Maggie's throat tightened. "I'm sorry. It was long ago." He turned to leave, then paused. "The storm will break tomorrow, but the path ahead is the most dangerous yet. The Devil's Staircase. A series of switchbacks so narrow the wagons will barely pass. And Holloway's men. If they're smart, they'll wait at the bottom, ambush us when we're most vulnerable." He studied her face in the dim light. "You should know, there's another way. A longer route that bypasses the staircase. It would take us 3 extra days, but might be safer. We don't have the supplies for 3 extra days." "No," he agreed. "We don't." The decision lay unspoken between them. The direct route, with its known dangers, or starvation on the safer path. "We'll face it together," Maggie said, echoing her words from the previous night. "That's still our deal." He nodded once, a gesture of respect rather than agreement. "Try to sleep, Maggie Hale. Tomorrow will demand all our strength." As promised, dawn brought a break in the storm. The sky cleared to a crystalline blue that seemed almost painful in its intensity after the grey darkness of the blizzard. The world had been transformed overnight into a cathedral of white, untouched and pristine. They set out in silence, each lost in private thoughts about the day ahead. The trail narrowed as they approached the Devil's Staircase, until they could see it in the distance, a series of tight switchbacks carved into the face of a cliff, descending almost 1,000 feet to the valley below. "Dear Lord," Samuel whispered as they paused at the top. "Pardon me, Miss Maggie, but I didn't think it would be quite so—" "Impossible," Maggie supplied, staring at the narrow track. In places it seemed barely wider than the wagons themselves. Kai studied the path with narrowed eyes. "One wagon at a time. I'll lead the first. Samuel takes the second, and so on. Maggie, you bring up the rear with the last wagon." The descent began with agonizing slowness. Each turn required precise handling to avoid plunging over the edge. The horses' hooves slipped on ice hidden beneath the fresh snow, and the men walked alongside the wagons, ready to brace them if a wheel slid too close to the precipice. Maggie watched from above as the first 3 wagons successfully navigated the upper switchbacks. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but a strange calm had settled over her mind. This moment, this test against the mountain, had stripped away all pretense. There was only survival now, and the strange trust that had formed between her and the Apache who guided them. "Your turn, Miss Maggie," called one of the men, returning up the path to take the 4th wagon. "Slow and steady now." She took the reins of the final wagon, speaking softly to the nervous horses. The first turn passed without incident, and the second. On the 3rd switchback, halfway down the face, the left rear wheel struck a rock hidden beneath the snow. The wagon lurched sharply, tipping toward the drop. Maggie cried out, pulling hard on the reins as the horses panicked. For a terrible moment, she felt the wagon lifting, beginning to roll. Then hands were on the wagon beside her, shoulders braced against the weight. Kai had appeared seemingly from nowhere, his face a mask of concentration as he pushed against the momentum of the slide. "Pull right," he commanded through gritted teeth. "Hard!" Maggie obeyed, using all her strength. Slowly the wagon settled back onto all 4 wheels. Sweat beaded on Kai's forehead despite the cold, his breath coming in ragged clouds as he kept pressure on the wagon bed. "Easy now," he murmured, as much to her as to the horses. "We're almost there." Together they guided the wagon through the remaining switchbacks. By the time they reached the bottom, where the others waited with visible relief, Maggie's arms shook from exertion, and her heart still raced from the near disaster. "Thought we'd lost you both," Samuel said, his weathered face pale. "That was too close." Kai scanned the valley before them, alert for any sign of danger. "We're not safe yet. This is where they'll be waiting if they're coming." The valley stretched before them, a snow-covered meadow bordered by forest on 3 sides. To reach Henderson Valley beyond, they would need to cross this exposed ground, a perfect place for an ambush. "We'll rest the horses, then move fast," Kai decided. "No stopping until we reach the trees on the far side." They allowed the teams 15 minutes to recover from the descent, checking harnesses and redistributing some of the timber to balance the loads more evenly. Maggie found herself watching Kai as he moved among the men, offering quiet suggestions and earning reluctant respect from even the most skeptical. When he approached her wagon, she asked the question that had been troubling her since their near fall. "Why did you come back for me? You could have been safely across the valley by now." His dark eyes met hers. "We made a deal. Is that the only reason?" For a moment, something unguarded crossed his face, an emotion Maggie couldn't name but felt echo within her own chest. Before he could answer, a shot rang out across the valley. Snow erupted in a plume just yards from the lead wagon. "Take cover!" Kai shouted, pulling Maggie behind the wagon as more shots followed. The ambush had begun. From the tree line across the valley, rifle fire erupted in a staggered pattern. At least 5 shooters, maybe more. The wagons provided some protection, but they were trapped with no easy escape route. "We can't go back up the staircase," Samuel gasped, pressing himself against a wagon wheel as bullets splintered wood above his head. "And we can't stay here," Maggie added. Already, one of the horses had been hit, its panicked screams cutting through the gunfire. Kai loaded his rifle with swift, practiced movements. "Samuel, you and your men provide covering fire. Maggie and I will circle through those rocks to the east. If we can get behind them, we might be able to drive them off." Maggie stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to go with you? You're the best shot here besides me," he said matter-of-factly. "Samuel told me how you won the shooting contest at last year's territorial fair." There was no time to question how or why Samuel had shared this information. Maggie checked her father's revolver, which she had transferred from her coat to her belt that morning. "On my signal," Kai instructed the men, who had positioned themselves with rifles ready. "Fire constantly for 1 minute. Give us time to get to those rocks." The ensuing dash across open ground was the longest minute of Maggie's life. Bullets kicked up snow around them as they ran in a crouch toward a tumble of boulders. Kai moved with the fluid grace she had come to associate with him, while she struggled to keep pace, her skirts hampering her movements. Behind the relative safety of the rocks, they paused to catch their breath. Kai assessed their position, then pointed to a stand of pines about 100 yards away. "We'll work our way to those trees, then circle behind their position." He glanced at her, concern evident in his eyes. "You don't have to do this." "Yes," she said firmly. "I do." They moved from cover to cover, using the terrain to shield their approach. The gunfire had decreased in intensity as Holloway's men conserved ammunition, allowing occasional shots to keep the wagon party pinned down. When they reached the pines, Kai touched Maggie's arm lightly. "Stay close. Walk where I walk." They slipped into the forest, moving parallel to the shooter's position. Maggie's heart thundered in her ears, but her hands remained steady on her father's revolver. She had never shot a man before. The thought should have terrified her, but in that moment, with her friends' lives at stake and Kai moving silently ahead of her, she found a cold clarity in her purpose. They came upon the first gunman so suddenly that Maggie barely had time to register his presence before Kai was upon him. A brief struggle ended with the man unconscious, his rifle now in Kai's hands. "4 more," he whispered. They found 2 more men positioned behind fallen logs, focusing their fire on the distant wagons. Kai signaled for Maggie to move to the right while he took the left. "Now," he mouthed. Maggie stepped forward, her revolver aimed at the nearest man's back. "Drop your weapons," she commanded, her voice stronger than she expected. The men whirled in surprise, but Kai's rifle was already trained on the second man. Faced with weapons at point-blank range, they hesitated. "I said drop them," Maggie repeated, her finger tightening on the trigger. The moment stretched balanced on a knife's edge. Then slowly, the men lowered their rifles. "Tell your friends to stop shooting and come out," Kai ordered, "or you die first." One of the men called out, his voice carrying across the forest. The gunfire stopped. After a tense silence, 2 more figures emerged from cover, hands raised. "Holloway sent you?" Maggie demanded of the man who seemed to be the leader. The man spat on the snow. "Didn't say who, paid gold to stop any timber shipments coming through the pass. Said to make sure none of you made it to Phoenix." "Well, you failed," Maggie said coldly. "Now you have a choice. You can leave. Take your wounded and your dead and go back to whoever paid you. Tell them the Apache who rules these mountains and the woman who made a deal with him are not to be crossed." The leader's eyes narrowed. "And if we don't?" Kai stepped closer, his rifle unwavering. "Then your bodies feed the crows and no one ever knows what happened to you." Something in his tone, the absolute certainty of a man who had seen too much death, convinced the gunmen. Within minutes they had gathered their belongings and their fallen comrade. "This ain't over," the leader warned as they prepared to depart. "Holloway won't stop. That land's worth too much." "Neither will we," Maggie replied. "Now go before we reconsider our mercy." As the men disappeared into the forest, heading back toward the settlement, Maggie felt a strange mixture of emotions wash over her. Relief, fear, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. Kai watched the retreating figures until they were out of sight. "They'll be back with more men. But not before we reach Phoenix," Maggie said, with more confidence than she felt. "We've won this round." He turned to her, his dark eyes searching her face. "Io did well. Most people freeze the first time they point a weapon at another human. I didn't want to kill them," she admitted, "but I would have, to protect the others." "That knowledge changes a person," he said softly. "The line between what you will and won't do to survive, once crossed, it can never be uncrossed." They made their way back to the wagons, where Samuel and the others greeted them with relief and awe. The story of how they had outflanked the ambushers quickly spread among the men, cementing an unexpected respect for both the Apache leader and the timber baron's daughter. "We move now," Kai announced, allowing no time for celebration. "We're still a day from Henderson Valley, and these men won't be the last Holloway sends." The remainder of the day passed in tense vigilance as they crossed the open valley, and entered the forest beyond. Maggie drove her wagon alongside Kai's, their shared experience creating a bubble of understanding that required few words. That evening, they made camp in a protected hollow where a fallen pine created a natural windbreak. The weather had held, but clouds gathering on the western horizon promised more snow by morning. After the men had eaten and settled in for the night, Maggie found Kai standing at the edge of camp, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains they had traversed. She offered him a cup of coffee, which he accepted with a nod of thanks. "What happens when we reach Phoenix?" she asked after a long silence. He sipped the coffee before answering, "I return to my people. You sell your timber and save your father's land. And our deal? You speak for us as promised. Tell them about the Sacred Valley. Make them understand." Maggie studied his profile in the moonlight, noticing for the first time a softness to his mouth that belied the hardness in his eyes. What if they don't listen? What if Holloway has too much influence? Then we will have tried. He turned to face her. Sometimes that's all we can do. The simplicity of his answer touched something in Maggie, a recognition of shared values beneath their vastly different lives. "When you were at school in Pennsylvania," she ventured, "did you ever imagine this would be your life? Fighting for your land, making deals with desperate white women?" A rare smile crossed his face. "I imagined becoming a lawyer, using the white man's laws to protect my people's rights." The smile faded. "But when I returned, I found that paper laws mean nothing against guns and greed. So you became the Apache who rules the mountains instead. I became what my people needed." He studied her face in the moonlight. "Just as you became what your father needed, not the London lady, but the frontier woman strong enough to cross the mountains in winter." His perception struck Maggie to her core. She had never articulated even to herself how her return from London had been both a failure and a homecoming, a surrender of one dream for the embrace of another. "In London," she said quietly, "everything was about appearances. Who you knew, how you spoke, what family you came from." She gestured to the wilderness around them. "Out here, none of that matters. What matters is whether you keep your word, whether you stand by those who depend on you, even if they're Apache." His question was soft but pointed. Maggie met his gaze directly. "Especially then." Something shifted between them, a barrier dissolving like spring ice. Kai reached out slowly, as if giving her time to retreat, and touched a strand of hair that had escaped her braid. "You should go back to the fire," he said, his voice rougher than before. "It's getting colder." But neither of them moved. In that moment, suspended between worlds, Maggie made another choice that couldn't be uncrossed. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "What if I'm not cold?" His hand moved from her hair to her cheek, calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Maggie Hale," he said, her name a question and a warning. She answered by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, a question asked and answered in the space between heartbeats. Then his arms encircled her, and the kiss deepened into something neither had anticipated when they made their deal on the mountainside. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Kai rested his forehead against hers. "This can't be," he whispered, though his arms remained around her. "Why not?" she challenged, her voice equally low. "You know why. Your world, my world, they don't meet except in violence." "They're meeting now," she insisted. "Not in violence, but in—" She hesitated, unable to name what was happening between them. "Understanding," he suggested. More than that. Maggie's heart raced as she admitted what she had been feeling since that moment in the cave, when he had told her about his sister. Respect, trust, perhaps even— He silenced her with another kiss, more urgent than the first, as if afraid of the words she might speak next. When he pulled away, his expression was torn between desire and resignation. "Even if what you feel is real," he said, "what future could there be? The woman who saved her father's timber mill and the Apache who rules the mountains. Your people would never accept it. Mine might not either." "I don't care what people accept," Maggie replied with sudden fierceness. "I've spent too long trying to be what others wanted, the proper London lady, the dutiful daughter. For once, I want to choose my own path." Kai's expression softened. "And you would choose this path, one that leads away from everything you've known?" I don't know where it leads, she admitted, but I know I want to find out, with you. He touched her face again, his eyes reflecting the stars above. First, we fulfill our deal. Get your timber to Phoenix. Save your father's land. Then we can speak of paths and futures. They returned to the fire separately, but something fundamental had changed. Maggie lay awake long into the night, replaying the kiss in her mind, wondering at her own boldness and the unfamiliar warmth that had taken root in her chest. Morning brought a light snowfall and renewed determination. With Henderson Valley now visible in the distance, their spirits lifted despite their exhaustion. They made good time across the relatively flat terrain, and by late afternoon they had reached the trading post that marked the entrance to Henderson Valley. The weathered building offered the first sign of civilization they had seen in days. A grizzled mountain man named Tanner ran the post, his surprise evident when he emerged to find 6 timber wagons led by an Apache warrior. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, eyeing the unusual party. "Heard talk of trouble in the mountains. Wasn't sure anyone would make it through till spring." "We need supplies," Maggie said, dismounting stiffly. "And information. Has anyone else come this way recently? Men looking for us, perhaps?" Tanner scratched his beard. "Couple riders came through yesterday. Rough sorts. Asked if I'd seen any timber wagons. Told 'em hadn't seen hide nor hair of any such party." Relief washed through Maggie. "How far to Phoenix from here?" 2 days good travel if the weather holds." Tanner's gaze shifted to Kai, who stood slightly apart. "You're, guide going all the way?" Kai and Maggie exchanged a glance loaded with unspoken meaning. "Yes," she said firmly. "Our deal goes all the way to Phoenix." They restocked their supplies and spent the night in Tanner's barn, a luxury after days of camping in the snow. The horses rested in proper stalls, and the men enjoyed the relative warmth of the hayloft. Maggie found Kai outside just before dawn, watching the eastern sky lighten behind the mountains they had conquered. "Having second thoughts?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "About our journey or about what happened last night?" His voice held a note of caution. "Either. Both." He turned to face her, his expression solemn. "I made a promise to guide you safely to Phoenix. I keep my promises, Maggie Hale. And the rest?" His eyes softened. "The rest is unexplored territory, for both of us." She smiled at his choice of words. "Then we'll explore it together. After Phoenix." "After Phoenix," he agreed, a promise in his voice that warmed her more than any fire could. Phoenix in 1876 was a city in transition, part frontier outpost, part ambitious metropolis, striving toward a future tied to the coming railroad. As the timber wagons rolled down Washington Street, Maggie noted the contrasts. Adobe buildings beside wood-frame structures, horses sharing the road with the occasional carriage, Mexican and Anglo faces mingling on the dusty boardwalks. They drew curious stares. This unlikely caravan with its female leader and Apache guide. Kai had changed into a more conventional shirt and coat, borrowed from Samuel, a concession to practicality in a town where his people were viewed with suspicion at best, hostility at worst. But there was no disguising his heritage or his proud bearing as he rode beside Maggie's wagon. "Arizona Timber and Sawmill Company should be near the end of the street," Maggie said, consulting the letter of agreement her father had negotiated months earlier. "Mr. Beaumont promised to take our entire shipment at the agreed price." Kai's expression remained neutral, but his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. "Remember what we discussed. Holloway may have sent word ahead." They found the lumberyard easily enough, a sprawling operation at the edge of town, with stacks of timber awaiting transport to construction sites throughout the territory. A portly man in a fine suit emerged from the office as they approached, his expression shifting from anticipation to confusion as he took in the unexpected sight. "Miss Hale?" he inquired, clearly surprised to find a woman leading the convoy. "Frederick Beaumont. We weren't expecting your shipment until spring." Maggie dismounted, extending her hand with the poise her London teachers had instilled. "Mr. Beaumont, my father sends his regrets that he couldn't come himself. His health prevents travel at present." Beaumont shook her hand, his gaze drifting to Kai and the weary men behind her. "You came through the White Mountains in winter?" "We did." Maggie maintained a businesslike tone. "And we've brought every board foot specified in our contract." "I trust the terms remain as agreed." A flicker of something, hesitation, concern, crossed Beaumont's face. "Perhaps we should discuss this in my office, Miss Hale." Inside the modest office, Beaumont offered her a seat, and after a moment's hesitation, extended the same courtesy to Kai. The tension in the room was palpable as Beaumont settled behind his desk. "I received a telegram 3 days ago," he began, selecting his words carefully, "from a Mr. Holloway of Northern Arizona Railroad Interests." Maggie's heart sank, but she kept her expression neutral. "Did you, indeed? And what did Mr. Holloway have to say?" "He informed me that the Hale timber operation is encumbered by significant debt. That foreclosure proceedings have begun." Beaumont shifted uncomfortably. "He suggested that accepting delivery might entangle my company in legal complications." "I see." Maggie's voice remained steady, despite the anger building within her. "And did you inform Mr. Holloway that we have a binding contract, signed and notarized for this delivery?" "I did mention that, yes." "And that breach of contract would constitute grounds for a substantial lawsuit?" Beaumont cleared his throat. "Miss Hale, I have no wish to cause difficulties for your family. But you must understand my position." "Your position," Kai interrupted, speaking for the first time since they'd entered the office, "appears to be that of a man considering breaking his word because another man with money has suggested it might be convenient." Beaumont flushed. "Now see here." "No, Mr. Beaumont, you see here." Maggie removed the contract from her satchel and placed it on the desk. "My father and I have fulfilled every obligation outlined in this document at considerable risk. We have a witness who can testify that Holloway sent armed men to prevent this delivery, men who fired upon us with intent to kill." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Now, you have 2 choices. Honor your contract, pay the agreed sum, and complete this transaction. Or explain to a territorial judge why you allowed a railroad speculator to interfere with a legitimate business agreement." For a tense moment, Beaumont seemed to weigh his options. Then his shoulders sagged slightly. "The full amount was $2,600, I believe." Relief washed through Maggie, though she was careful not to show it. "Plus the 10% bonus clause for delivery before the first of the year." "Of course." Beaumont managed a tight smile. "I'll have my clerk prepare the bank draft immediately." Outside, as they waited for the payment to be arranged, Maggie found herself trembling slightly. From exhaustion, relief, or the aftermath of confrontation, she wasn't sure. "You did well," Kai said quietly. "Your father would be proud." "We did well," she corrected him. "I couldn't have done this without you." His expression softened. "What will you do now?" "Pay off the bank loan, save the mill. Then—" She hesitated, looking up at him. "That depends on what happens next." Before he could respond, a commotion at the end of the street caught their attention. 4 riders were approaching at a steady trot, men in suits rather than trail clothes, but with the unmistakable bearing of authority. Samuel hurried over from where he had been supervising the unloading. "Marshal Thompson and his deputies," he muttered, "and that's Holloway with them." Maggie recognized the railroad man immediately, tall and impeccably dressed, with a silver-streaked beard and the confident air of someone accustomed to getting his way. The marshal beside him was a younger man with a weathered face and the wary eyes of a frontier lawman. They reined in before the timber yard. Marshal Thompson dismounted first, his hand resting casually near his holspin. "Miss Hale?" Maggie stepped forward, chin raised. "Yes, Marshal? I've got some questions about your journey through the White Mountains." His gaze shifted to Kai, standing protectively at her side. "And about your companion here." Holloway remained mounted, looking down at them with barely concealed triumph. "I told you they'd be here, Marshal. Just as I said, the Hale girl and that Apache renegade." "What exactly are we accused of, Marshal?" Maggie asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Received reports of an attack on honest men in the mountains," Thompson replied. 3 dead, 2 wounded. Survivors claim they were ambushed by an Apache and a white woman." "Those honest men were hired guns," Kai said coldly. "They fired on our party first. We defended ourselves. And why would anyone fire on a timber shipment?" The marshal's tone was skeptical. "Perhaps you should ask Mr. Holloway," Maggie suggested, "since he's the one who hired them to prevent our delivery." Holloway scoffed. "Preposterous accusations from a desperate woman and a savage. Marshal, I demand you arrest them both, the Apache for murder and the woman as an accomplice." The tension in the street thickened as Samuel and the other men moved closer, their hands drifting toward their weapons. The marshal's deputies spread out slightly, creating a potential crossfire. "Before you make decisions you might regret, Marshal," Maggie said clearly. "You should know that we have witnesses, 6 men who saw everything, who will testify that Holloway's men ambushed us without provocation. And you should know," Kai added, "that the White Mountain Apache are at peace with the United States government. An unjust arrest could threaten that peace." The marshal frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the situation Holloway had drawn him into. "I need to sort this out properly. Miss Hale, Mr. I don't believe I caught your name, sir." "Kai," he replied simply, "Chief of the Eagle clan of the White Mountain Apache." A murmur ran through the growing crowd of onlookers. Holloway's face darkened with anger. "Don't be fooled by their lies, Thompson," he snapped. "This is a simple case of murder and theft. The Hale timber operation is in foreclosure. This shipment legally belongs to the bank, and by extension to my company, which has purchased the debt." "That's not true," Maggie protested. "We have until the end of the month to repay the loan. Once Mr. Beaumont completes our transaction—" "It's too late for that," Holloway interrupted with a cold smile. "I've obtained an emergency injunction from Judge Williston, freezing all Hale assets pending review of the foreclosure proceedings, including this timber shipment." Maggie felt as if the ground had dropped from beneath her feet. Judge Williston was known to be in the railroad's pocket, had been for years. If he had signed an injunction— "May I see this injunction?" Kai asked suddenly, his voice calm and measured. Holloway blinked in surprise. "You can read, can you?" "Better than most, Mr. Holloway. I studied law at the Carlisle Indian School before returning to my people." The revelation clearly unsettled Holloway, who reluctantly produced a folded document from his coat. The marshal took it and, after a brief hesitation, handed it to Kai. Maggie watched as he carefully read the paper, his expression revealing nothing. When he finished, he looked up with the faintest hint of a smile. "This injunction," he said clearly so all could hear, "applies specifically to all timber harvested from Hale lands after January 12, 1876. Our shipment was cut in November of last year. It is not covered by this order." Holloway's face flushed with anger. "That's a technicality." "The law is built on technicalities, Mr. Holloway." Kai handed the document back to the marshal. "As I believe Judge Williston would be the first to acknowledge." Marshal Thompson studied the injunction, then nodded slowly. "He's right. This doesn't cover timber harvested before January 12th. He turned to Maggie. "Can you prove when this wood was cut?" "Our mill records document every tree," she confirmed, "and Mr. Beaumont's contract specifies timber from our fall harvest." Beaumont, who had emerged from his office during the confrontation, reluctantly nodded his confirmation. The marshal sighed, clearly relieved to have a legitimate reason to avoid the confrontation Holloway was pushing for. "Seems to me this is a business matter to be settled properly in court. In the meantime, the delivery can proceed as contracted." Holloway's face contorted with rage. "This isn't over, Thompson, and you—" He jabbed a finger toward Kai. "Should remember that your people live on borrowed land. One word from the right officials, and the reservation boundaries could shift overnight." "Is that a threat, Mr. Holloway?" Kai's voice was dangerously quiet. "It's a fact. The sacred valley you're so desperate to protect. By spring, it'll be a railroad depot." The crowd had grown larger, drawn by the confrontation between the powerful railroad man and the unlikely allies opposing him. Maggie suddenly realized they had an audience: settlers, merchants, even a newspaper reporter scribbling notes. This was the moment, the fulfillment of their deal. "The valley Mr. Holloway refers to," she said, raising her voice to address the crowd, "is sacred ground to the White Mountain Apache. It has been for centuries. And unlike Mr. Holloway, Chief Kai and his people have shown that they can be honorable partners to those willing to treat them with respect." She moved to stand shoulder to shoulder with Kai. 6 men are alive today, good men from Crowley's Basin, because the Apache who rules the mountains chose to guide us safely through a deadly winter journey. He could have demanded money. Instead, he asked only that we recognize the right of his people to their sacred lands. The reporter was writing furiously now. Marshal Thompson looked thoughtful, while Holloway's expression darkened further. "The railroad will bring progress to this territory," Maggie continued. "No one disputes that. But progress built on broken promises and stolen land isn't progress at all. It's just another form of theft dressed up in finer clothes. A murmur of agreement rippled through parts of the crowd. Even some of the merchants, men who stood to benefit from the railroad's arrival, seemed to be considering her words. The Apache have kept peace for 2 years under Chief Kai's leadership, she concluded. They ask only for what was promised to them, the right to their sacred places, the respect due to any people. Surely our great territory is vast enough to accommodate both the future the railroad brings and the heritage that was here long before any of us arrived. Silence followed her words. Then, surprisingly, Marshal Thompson nodded. Well said, Miss Hale. He turned to Holloway. I suggest you pursue your business interests through proper legal channels, sir, and leave these people be for now. Holloway's jaw worked as he struggled to contain his fury. This territory belongs to those with the vision to build its future, he finally said, not to superstitious savages or sentimental women. He yanked his horse around. You'll regret crossing me, both of you. As he rode away, his men following reluctantly behind, Beaumont approached with an envelope in hand. Your payment, Miss Hale, in full, as agreed. The bank draft represented salvation for her father's business, the culmination of their desperate journey. Yet as Maggie accepted it, she felt strangely hollow. One battle won, but at what cost? And how many more would follow? Kai stood beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. You kept your word, he said quietly. Both parts of our deal are fulfilled. Are they? She looked up at him, suddenly uncertain. Holloway won't give up. The valley isn't safe yet. No, he agreed. But you've given us something we didn't have before. What's that? Allies. He gestured to the dispersing crowd, some of whom nodded respectfully as they passed. And a voice that carries beyond the mountains. The newspaper reporter approached, introducing himself as William Preston of the Arizona Weekly Enterprise. Quite a story you two have, Miss Hale. Mind if I get a few details for my article? As Maggie spoke with the reporter, carefully emphasizing the cooperation between settlers and Apache that had made their journey possible, she was acutely aware of Kai preparing to depart. Samuel and the men were saying their goodbyes, shaking his hand with newfound respect. When Preston finally left, promising a favorable account in the next edition, Maggie found Kai waiting beside his horse at the edge of the timber yard. You're leaving, she said, unable to keep the disappointment from her voice. I must return to my people. Tell them what has happened. His expression softened as he looked down at her. And consider what comes next. What does come next, Kai? She stepped closer, lowering her voice. For us? He touched her cheek gently, unconcerned with any who might be watching. That depends on what you want, Maggie Hale. I want... She hesitated, then found her courage. I want to build something new. Not just a saved timber mill or a protected valley, but a bridge between worlds that aren't supposed to meet. A rare, full smile transformed his face. Then I will return in 1 month's time, when the first spring flowers appear in the high meadows, and we will see what bridge can be built. How will I know where to meet you? The cave where we first made our deal. His hand moved from her cheek to gently touch the rabbit fur blanket she still wore wrapped around her shoulders. Bring this. It belongs with you now. Maggie wanted to object, to insist he take back his sister's gift, but something in his eyes stopped her. I'll be there, she promised instead. He mounted his horse in a fluid motion. 1 month, Maggie Hale. When the mountain decides it's spring. 1 month, she echoed. Be careful, Kai. And you. His eyes held hers for a long moment. The battle for your father's land isn't over yet. With that, he turned his horse and rode away, a solitary figure heading back toward the mountains that had brought them together. Maggie watched until he disappeared from sight, the bank draft clutched in her hand and his promise warming her heart, despite the uncertain future ahead. Epilogue: The Bridge Between Worlds. Spring came early to the White Mountains that year. By mid-February, the snow had retreated to the highest peaks, and the first wildflowers were already dotting the meadows. In Crowley's Basin, the Hale timber mill ran at full capacity. The sound of it saw a constant reminder of promises kept and battles won. Maggie stood in her father's office, her office now in many ways, as he continued his slow recovery. The newspaper clipping on the desk had been read so many times, its folds were beginning to tear. Frontier Alliance, Timber Heiress and Apache Chief Defeat Railroad Scheme. Preston's article had caused a sensation throughout the territory. Public opinion, initially skeptical, had gradually shifted as other newspapers picked up the story. Governor Safford himself had written to express interest in negotiating a formal agreement to protect certain Apache lands while allowing controlled development elsewhere. Holloway had not given up, of course. Legal challenges to the Hale ownership continued, but with their debts paid and public sympathy on their side, his chances of success had diminished significantly. The railroad would come, but it would need to find another route, one that respected both progress and heritage. "Are you certain about this, Maggie?" her father asked from the doorway. Thomas Hale looked older than his 50 years, his recent illness having left its mark, but his eyes were clear and sharp as ever. "I am," she replied, straightening the papers on the desk. "The business is secure now. Samuel knows the operation as well as either of us. And you're well enough to oversee things again." He sighed, moving to stand beside her. "That's not what I meant, and you know it." Maggie met his gaze directly. "You mean, am I certain about Kai? About everything this means? The life you're choosing?" He gestured vaguely toward the window, where their newly hired workers loaded fresh-cut timber. "You could have a normal life now. Fletcher at the bank has been asking after you. Or you could return to London. To what? A society that values appearance over substance? A marriage based on convenience rather than respect?" Maggie shook her head. "I've found something real, Father. Something true." Thomas Hale studied his daughter's face, seeing in it the determination that reminded him so much of her mother. "It won't be easy," he said finally. "People will talk. Some will never accept it. Let them talk." Maggie smiled softly. "The mountain doesn't care what people say about it. Neither do I." Her father chuckled despite himself. "You always were stubborn. Your mother would say you came by it honestly." His expression grew serious again. "Will I see you again?" "Of course. Often." She took his hands in hers. "We're building a bridge, Father, not burning one." Later that afternoon, Maggie rode along the now familiar trail toward the Devil's Doorway. The rabbit fur blanket was wrapped securely behind her saddle, and a small pack contained the few possessions she couldn't bear to leave behind. Her mother's locket, her favorite books, the derringer that had seen her through their winter journey. The cave looked different in spring, less a shelter from the storm than a gateway to something new. Maggie dismounted, letting her horse drink from the small stream that had been frozen during her first visit. "You came." She turned to find Kai standing at the edge of the clearing, the sunlight catching the silver band he now wore as a symbol of his leadership. He looked different too. Still the warrior she had come to know, but with a lightness she hadn't seen before. "I promised I would," she replied, moving toward him. "Has anything changed? With your people? They are cautious, skeptical." A smile touched his lips. "But the newspaper helped, and the governor's letter. They begin to believe that words might mean something this time." "And us?" Maggie asked, stopping before him. "Has anything changed there?" In answer, Kai closed the distance between them, drawing her into an embrace that spoke more eloquently than words. When their lips met, it was with the certainty of a decision already made. "Nothing has changed," he murmured against her hair, "and everything has." He led her to where 2 horses waited, his own and another, laden with supplies. "I have something to show you," he said, "if you're ready." They rode higher into the mountains, following game trails that wound through awakening forests and across meadows bright with early flowers. By late afternoon, they crested a ridge, and Kai reined in his horse. "There," he said, pointing to the valley below. Maggie gasped softly. The sacred valley lay spread before them, a hidden paradise nestled between protective peaks. A small river wound through its center, bordered by ancient cottonwoods just coming into leaf. In a protected hollow near the base of the eastern slope stood a structure, part traditional Apache wickiup, part cabin, with a stone chimney rising from its center. "What is it?" she asked, though her heart already knew. "A beginning," Kai answered simply. "A place that is neither fully Apache nor fully white. A bridge." As they descended into the valley, Maggie felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This place, this life, would never be easy. There would be battles ahead, prejudices to overcome, a constant negotiation between worlds that resisted connection. But as Kai helped her dismount before the dwelling he had built with his own hands, As the setting sun painted the sacred valley in hues of gold and amber, Maggie Hale knew she had found her true home. Not in London's grand ballrooms or even in her father's timber mill, but here, in this impossible space between worlds, with this man who had taught her that the most precious freedom was the freedom to choose one's own path. "Welcome home, Maggie Hale," Kai said softly, opening the door to their shared future. Hand in hand, they stepped across the threshold, leaving footprints that belonged neither to one world nor the other, but to the bridge they were building together. The end. Dear listener, there's a profound wisdom that emerges when we allow a story to touch us beyond mere entertainment. Maggie and Kai show us that even in life's harshest winters, when paths seem impassable, unexpected warmth can be found in hands we never imagined would reach out to us. In our own journeys, we too face mountains that seem impossible to climb. Age brings its own ravines, changing health, loneliness that sometimes appears like a sudden blizzard, or the feeling that the world moves on while we wonder about our place in it. But remember, you've weathered storms others couldn't endure. You've built bridges over chasms that seemed impossible. You've survived winters that promised never to end. The people we most admire in life aren't those who never fell, but those who rose again and again, who learned to trust in the unexpected, who had the courage to let go of old certainties to embrace new truths. As you rest your head on your pillow tonight, know that you are protected by all the strength you've already shown throughout your journey. Allow yourself to dream of sacred valleys yet to be discovered in your life. The path ahead may be different from what you planned in your youth, but it might be even more beautiful for having been chosen with the wisdom of years. It's never too late to make a deal with the mountain, to find new beginnings, to build bridges between worlds that seemed destined to remain apart. And never ever is it too late to open the door to a new dawn. Sleep peacefully, knowing you possess all the courage needed to face tomorrow. Like the mountains that have witnessed countless seasons, you too endure, strong, resilient, and wiser with each passing day. With deep gratitude for sharing this moment with us. The Wild West Whispers team. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. If Maggie and Kai's journey touched your heart, we kindly invite you to subscribe to our channel, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and pass this story along to others who love powerful tales of love, redemption, and resilience. Your support inspires us every day to keep telling stories that move souls and connect us across time and distance. Don't forget, at the end of this video, another story suggestion from our channel will appear. Click it and let yourself be surprised by more unforgettable romances from the wild frontier. With gratitude and warmth, the Wild West Whispers team.